Everybody, thank you for coming out at 8 a.m. on the fourth day of PIA. My name is Sherry Butcher, and I'm excited to be here as part of the USPA Rewrite Task Force. We want to welcome you to this forum. The seminars at PIA have a long history of introducing equipment, safety and training advancements, and today is no different. The SIM is a member-driven effort that's a result of a highly collaborative group of USPA members, examiners, instructors, headquarters staff, and board members. And it is a long-awaited and much-needed update, but I don't think I had to tell you that. The USPA Rewrite Task Force and all of the experts involved in the subcommittees obviously love skydiving and love USPA. We consider it a privilege to be part of this significant move forward, and we're really proud to be able to present to you today a modern and professional Skydivers Information Manual for all USPA members and drop zones. The task force and all the experts involved in the subcommittees obviously love skydiving. The 9 members of the task force, 2 of them couldn't be here today, provided a breadth of experience that spanned all instructional methods and were from both large and small drop zones. Yet we never found a difference of opinion that we could not overcome for the good of the project. And we considered it to be a privilege to be part of this and proud to put forward such a good and innovative product for you. Now let's introduce our task force. Brandon Radcliffe is a coach examiner, drop zone manager at Skydive Sebastian, USPA board member, and the lead of the Rewrite Task Force. Dr. Jen Sharp is an examiner rating course director, a coach in tandem and AFF examiner, and USPA director of technology. Ron Bell is a coach, tandem, and AFF examiner, FAA rigger and pilot, and the USPA director of safety and training. Rob Laidlaw is an examiner rating course director, coach and AFF examiner, owner and founder of Skydive University. And the 2 members that couldn't be here today, Darlene Kellner is an IAD and coach examiner, drop zone owner, and holds a master's in education. Michael Watkins is an examiner in all of the disciplines, an FAA rigger, and the chair of the Safety and Training Committee. Brian Naiman is a coach and AFF designated evaluator, DZO and DZM at Skydance Skydiving, the USPA Pacific Regional Director. And Mel Schock, coach examiner, master's in education with over 20 years experience, and the operations manager at iFly Colorado Springs.
And because Sherry couldn't introduce herself, we also, as you know, have Sherry Butcher. She probably doesn't need an introduction. She's the coach and AFF examiner, FAA master rigger, skydiving museum board trustee, USPA vice president, and the drop zone owner at Air Ohio Skydiving. We also had a great deal of input from the following folks. I'll leave it up for a second. I won't read all their names. But many of these people contributed a great deal of information. We recognize that when we were all examiners, we're not experts in every area. And so these are the people upon whom we rely to provide us with a lot of information. We very much appreciate them, as well as the members of the USPA headquarters staff who helped us put the entire book together. So we have a few questions today, as you're reading that. We'd like to know, who has seen the new SIM? Oh, that's fabulous. How many of you brought one? Who is a student? No students? Do we have any coaches? Instructors? Examiners? Any DCOs? Excellent. So as we figured out this project, we really wanted to make sure we had a chance to market the sim, give you a reason to open it, and help you to understand that it is very new, and that going forward, it'll look a lot different. We also had several people who contributed to some subcommittees for the IRM, which is in the process of a rewrite. We're going to give you a little sneak peek today. We don't have a ton to show you because we're still just getting started, but we did put together committees to broaden the knowledge depth that we had. And these are the members of the committees. We had a coach subcommittee led by Rob Laidlaw. Michael Watkins led the IAD and static line teams. Sherry was the team lead for the AFF subcommittee, and then Ron Bell led the tandem committee.
So the beauty of this project and the reason that we believe that these USPA manuals are going to be so widely accepted is because we're able to reach out nationally and internationally and bring these people in for consulting and making sure that we had the most up-to-date training methods being added to the SIM and the IRM. The next thing I want to do is I can't tell you how great it feels to get where we are now without starting with a little history. So I want to give you a brief history on the origin of the SIM and the integrated student program. Okay, so back in 1957, Jacques Estelle, D2, put together the first 10 procedures and safety regulations. The name changed to Basic Safety Regulations in 1960, and an additional 8 BSRs were added. In 1963, recommendations were also added. And then for the next 20 years, the board created policy and recommendations, and they were kept at USPA in little one-page training and information sheets. They called them parts. Well, initially SOPs and then called them parts for a long time. And as the board approved these, they just stacked up. They'd make thousands of copies, keep them at USPA, and when a static line instructor or a course director was trying to put together a course, he would call into USPA, say, I need part number 5, 7, 12, 50, whatever those all are, and I need however many copies for the course candidates. USPA would put them in an envelope in packets and send them out. That was the only way at the time that the most up-to-date information could get out to USPA members who were candidates in static line instructor courses. In 1982, Mike Johnston was hired as the first director of training at USPA, and during his tenure, he was responsible for some of putting those packets together, sending them out, updating them on a regular basis, all of the parts, and keeping it organized at USPA. Eventually, he decided something had to change, and he began to organize the training information sheets and the rules into a 3-ring binder that could easily be updated. It was named the Skydiver Information Manual, and the first SIM was finished at the end of 1987, and it was released in 1988. Now, I was lucky to sit down with Mike last night when we were walking around, and he brought with him a stack of historical books, and one of them was the very first SIM. It was really cool to look through, and just so interesting. The SIM expanded over the years as more information developed for the AFF and the tandem program, and it became the go-to manual for what you needed to know and understand about skydiving procedures. And that was for students, licensed jumpers, instructors, anybody that was skydiving. One-stop shopping was the SIM. Then in the 1990s, the Integrated Student Program began development under the direction of Mike Truffer. He was the chair of the Safety and Training Committee, and also involved was Chris Needles. He was the executive director of USPA at the time. Kevin Gibson and Madeline Murdoch, who were both members of the board at the time, worked to detail the training methods for static line, tandem, and AFF, and align them for the beginnings of the ISP. Kevin Gibson resigned from the USPA board in 1987 and became USPA's Director of Communications. He worked closely with Chris Needles while he was writing the ISP program. But Chris Needles provided the guardrails and the focus of the ISP, and including the name. He came up with the name for it. Now, Rob Laidlaw and Roger Nelson deserve credit for the content of the ISP. Roger and Rob both expanded their own individual programs to 20 jump programs from the 7 jump AFF program years before USPA did. And I remember Roger telling me years ago that, if you present a 20 jump program to a student and that's their goal, then they hang around and they come back and they do 20 jumps because they want to meet that goal. Brilliant. But the meat of the ISP jumps, the coach jumps, came from Rob and Skydive University. Thank you. Rob in particular was the one who put some science and psychology into the system of coaching, and had a progression for learning skydiving skills. The ISP was approved by the USPA board in 2000 and was added to the 2001 SIM as the recommended student training. As an aside, with permission, when Kevin was putting together this program, we stole shamelessly from both Roger and Rob to get the best that the industry had to offer to put together a much stronger minimum standard for the new USPA A license. And thank goodness we did, because it built a nice foundation for everything we have done since then. It was about the same time that the IRM was being developed, and the rating course training information was split off into the IRM. Those were big steps forward for that time, but a lot has changed in the last 25 years. So today we're going to show you USPA's commitment to progress and serving its members. We are announcing 3 things today: the advancements and changes in the 2025 SIM, the reorganization and change in purpose of the IRM, and to introduce the examiner evaluator manual that's being designed to improve the quality of instruction for the entire grading hierarchy. And we are excited about all of it. So we want to share with you the team's progress so far, but more importantly, we would like you to pay attention and to show you the integration and alignment of the content between the manuals and the A license progression card. And as we continue in this process, updating the manuals, what we really hope is that all of you will lean into this project with us. We can only make it better if you give us feedback and tell us what we missed and what we can make better. We've made a lot of great changes to the SIM, but we already have a list of improvements for 2026. So please help us make it better. Send us your feedback as you work with the book and work with your students using it, so that we can get those integrated as we do revisions. So I feel like it is an extraordinary time to be a skydiver, especially a new skydiver. And it is so fun to work in the future and for the future. So let's see what we've done.
This is the cover of the new sim. It doesn't look a whole lot different on the outside, but if you've picked it up, you've noticed it's a lot thinner. That was one of our goals, was to condense it down and make it more usable by making it a little less bulky. And you'll notice that here are some things that we changed. The ISP is now student-centered. Before, with the bullet points, if you didn't have the vocabulary of skydiving, it was pretty hard to follow along. So the things in the ISP were really guides for instructors and coaches about what they needed to teach. It was more of an outline of what you had to teach. Now the ISP is directed completely at the student. You can actually hand it to them, and they can read it and learn something whether they had any prior knowledge. We did a really bold reorganization of the sim. We're going to go over details of that here in a few minutes, but we got rid of the title of sections and now they're chapters, and there are far fewer of them. We talked to the experts, as we said before, and got some recommendations. A lot of sections hadn't been updated in a very long time. You'll notice that canopy is quite a bit different. There's expanded stuff for wingsuits. We'll go more into that in depth, but we updated the information by talking to the people who are experts in those areas. The IRM is going to be much expanded. We're going to talk a little bit more about that at the end, a little teaser. There will be a teacher's guide for teaching the first jump course. And then there's the all new ratings examiner and evaluator manual that Sherry referred to. So how this project started. That's you. Yeah. I'm sorry, I started to keep going.
That's okay. So how the project started. Excuse me. How the project started. In about August of 23, the board put together a canopy task force with the goal of just reviewing all of the canopy skills in the ISP, the B license, maybe a C and D license stuff, and just kind of taking a look, going, you know, maybe it's time to look at everything and make it better. The members of that task force were Jen Sharp, Brandon Radcliffe, Angie Aragon, Jeannie Bartholomew. Our newest member is Oleg Priadko, and myself. And what we did is we first reviewed all of the ISP canopy skills. We reviewed the A license progression card to make sure that everything that was already in the sim was added to the card, and then also added some more canopy skills. We reviewed the B license canopy card and what the jumps included on that, what skills people were doing for the B license. We defined canopy flight emergency procedures, and if you are not familiar with those, you're going to hear a lot about them in the sim and in the IRM. A canopy flight emergency is any emergency under a fully inflated parachute from opening to landing. So a canopy flight emergency procedure is a jumper's response to that emergency. We practice emergency procedures for malfunctions before every jump, right? We think about it, we're practicing pulling handles. If we have an emergency under a canopy, then we should be just as proficient at responding to that emergency as we are to a malfunction. And the only way we're going to do that is if we practice. So we wanted to label 5 skills that are considered canopy flight emergency procedures and encourage people to practice them at least once a month on a high pull or a hop and pop so that they can maintain proficiency. And that was where the Stay Alive Practice 5 initiative came from, that you may have heard last Safety Day, and that we've been trying to promote in parachutist throughout the last year, and will continue to do so. We also created a downsizing best practices card. And this downsizing best practices card was designed to help a self-assessment tool for jumpers and for SMTAs and canopy coaches to help check the readiness of somebody to change canopies. Broken into 3 places, and they're gonna have a QR code in a little while that you'll be able to pull it up and look at it if you haven't seen it already. But assessing what you need to do to decide if you're ready to downsize, what you need to do when you downsize, and then how are you gonna stay proficient after you downsize, which is gonna obviously include Stay Alive Practice 5 and make sure that you know your canopy flight emergency procedures. We're also gonna look in the future, we're looking at C&D license skills to earn a license later on to try to maintain that proficiency. Now this was all presented to the board about a year ago at the winter board meeting, and it was approved. And our goal at the time was to just integrate the skills and teaching into the 2025 SIM and IRM. But soon after that meeting, after years of talking about the SIM rewrite, Brandon Radcliffe got the idea that we should finally move forward and let's just get this done. He got approval from President Chuck Akers to organize this task force, and it was like the perfect storm. Brandon organized the team and coordinated with headquarters. Jen Sharp and Ron already had a basic design in place, and Jen had already started putting the SIM into sentence form. So we already had a nice basis to start. And the Canopy Task Force no longer had to integrate their work into the old SIM. Instead, we shifted gears to the bigger project of the SIM and IRM rewrites. All the pieces came together with technology, people, time, commitment to the project, and the momentum launched us into a tight deadline in order to have the new SIM ready for publication for 2025. So all these decisions were made about 11 months ago, maybe, and this is what we came up with. So we've spent a lot of time working on it, and we're super happy about it. We've now moved on to the IRM, and we have a preliminary draft presented to the board for review, and we hope to get approval of concept on that at this coming meeting this weekend that starts on Saturday.
We made multiple changes to the SIM, and one of the things that we did is that we wanted to match some terminology, voice, and style. A lot of what was in the SIM terminology wasn't used anymore, or was pretty outdated, and the voice, there really wasn't one, it was an outline. We wrote it into paragraph form to make it easier to read. It reads much more like a textbook. You could hand this to a student, they can learn from it, you can read it yourself, and it is written at a level that all skydivers pretty much should be able to access this. We bolded the main concepts. Anytime, just like a textbook, anytime there's a main concept that's really important, we bolded it so people could draw attention to it and reduce the cognitive load. That was kind of the advantage of having some educators on our team. So we're pretty familiar with textbooks and pretty familiar with what helps people to understand text structure and take meaning from it. We put in call-outs where there's new vocabulary, mostly in the ISP. We speak another language. And anytime we used a new term, we put a call-out in there. I distinctly remember teaching first jump courses and then asking the student afterwards what their dive flow was, and they said, "What's a dive flow?" Because it wasn't a term that I had necessarily used in the course, and it didn't occur to me that they didn't know what I was talking about. And so we have call-outs for all of those to try to make the sim a little more useful and a little more readable for everyone. Here's an example for you. This is quite literally a section out of category A. also added a lot of graphics. And Oleg went around and asked some instructors that have seen the sim, what's your favorite part? And overwhelmingly, their answer was the graphics. And so we wanted you to see a sample of what that looks like. You'll notice main deployment handle is bolded there in the first paragraph. It's an important concept. Cutaway handle, reserve handle, main parachute, and then we added these graphics that have captions. And by doing that, we made it much more accessible, the information easier to understand for everyone. The ISP is now addressed to all students, and we wrote it in second person so they know that we are talking to them. It uses you and your. We changed it to an active voice. We wanted to be concise, we wanted to be direct, and we wanted to tell them what to do, and so we did. We made it an active voice that tells you exactly what should be happening. And the modern example, one example of the modern terminology, we no longer use the word horseshoe. We had a pretty big discussion about this, and some of these discussions ranged for a really long time. But it doesn't look like a horseshoe when you're underneath it. And to a student, it doesn't resemble a horseshoe at all if they're tumbling through it. And so we decided to call it what it is. And we wanted to simplify some of the language. So if you notice there's some terms that aren't there anymore, it's because we decided it was time. A horseshoe is now referred to as a premature container opening and a pilot chute entanglement. That's what it is. And so we tried to update the language wherever possible to call things as they are. Giving them a name that a student couldn't understand wasn't very useful. And so as you go throughout the sim, you'll notice that that is a major change that we made. Here's an example of the page that talks about what we used to call a horseshoe, now as a pilot chute entanglement. And it shows you another example of the graphics. We tried to include a lot of them because we're hoping to entice you into reading it. It's our dirty little trick to get you excited and wanting to check it out. And you'll notice there's a caption at the bottom. All right. So, updates and changes in organization. Here is a major change as well. We moved the ISP to Chapter 1. First, actually, we expanded the introduction by quite a bit. And then we moved the ISP from Section 4 to Chapter 1. Anybody have any guesses as to why we would do that? Students had to leaf through the book and go through information that they didn't even understand yet. They didn't know what a BSR was, but they had to go past it. They didn't have a license yet, but they had to go past it. And so we stuck the ISP at the very beginning of the book, making it easier to access for students. Hopefully that will also help with student retention because they'll feel like they can find the information that they need and not be left in the dark. We moved Section 9, which was the FAA regulations. BSRs are the few rules that we have, regulations. And the FAA regulations are the other rules that we have, and they were at the opposite ends of the book. We collapsed those two together and put all the regulations into one chapter. And then Jen Sharp had the brilliant idea, the FAA regulations, rather than us trying to relist them and keeping up with changes, there's a QR code now that you can scan. It will take you directly to the FAA regulation at the FAA's website, so you're getting your information from the source. And all of those are together now in Chapter 2. We took Chapters 3 and 8, the membership and the awards, and we put those together. Those are the kinds of things that are relevant for members that they would need to access, but maybe not every day. And then we took and put QR codes to the applications for the awards. Because all of that is done online now, rather than having to say, here's the award, here's where you find it, there's QR codes and you can go apply for them. Chapter 4 is what used to be Section 5. Since everything else moved up, so did that. And instead of being general recommendations, we titled that Recommendations for Everyone. Because that applies whether you have 26 jumps or 2,600 jumps. And so, in the interest of moving it to skydiver-friendly language and a little easier to read, we called that section Recommendations for Everyone. In Chapter 5, you're going to find your discipline-specific recommendations. That's where you can look to go for wingsuit flying, speed flying, your canopy piloting, more advanced canopy piloting information. And then chapter 6 is what used to be section 7. And it has all of the information from the prorating. And so the book is now 6 chapters instead of 9 sections. And it's reorganized to make things make a little more sense. You're not trying to figure out which section would this be in, because there are a couple of possibilities. They're collapsed together. Oh, this is me too, sorry. We were gonna, if some of you had Sims with you, the idea was that we would like to have you find a few things in the Sim, in the ISP in particular, because that's what we're gonna talk about next. We wanted people to take a few minutes and dig into it and see if they could find some answers. But given that at the beginning, a lot of you said you didn't have one with you, there's a link to the top, at the top, to the PDF version, and I really recommend that you take a screenshot of this. Take this back to your drop zones. Have your instructors start going through and ask them to find this information and these questions, because it will get them into the material and help them find some things that are different. The CEPs, as Sherry said, they're new, and we really wanted to focus on them. And asking what section does CEP start in, they can't teach them if they don't know what section they're supposed to, or which category they're supposed to teach them in. We also added, obviously, the stair-step approach for docking and formation. What category are we sticking that in? Where can they find it? These questions might help you to get your staff digging in.
Okay, so we would like to just pause for a second and see if there are any questions so far that the panel can answer for you. Or comments. Yes?
So I have a quick question. I don't know if you guys are going to go over this or not, but for each chapter there's a title that I think was really, really cool. So I wanted to ask, how did you guys come up with the titles for those chapters? Like I think Cat A is RH, Cat B is Basics, Cat C.
That's a general answer.
That's
Hi. That was my fault, or whatever, if you like it or not. When the ISP first came out, I couldn't remember them. And so I did it for myself and for coach candidates. And so, yeah, just used it throughout the years to sort of shortcut everything.
Yeah, no, I thought it was great. It was something that came into my mind and I wanted to ask, so thanks, Ben.
I wanted to give an example of what it was when we said active voice, in case you don't know what that means. There was so much language in there, and it drove me crazy as a programmer, that was like, for example, something like, the application for the license can be submitted to USPA headquarters, da-da-da. It's like, well, who submits that? Is it the student? Is it the instructor? So some of that language was flipped. So now it would say the applicant may submit the license application. Just little things like that that left all this weird interpretation. Now it's very clear about who can do what. So I wanted to give an example of that one.
Anybody else? Any other questions yet? Okay, we're gonna move on then. So the A license card. We're gonna look now at chapter 1 in this, the new SIM, and how the ISP is organized, and how the A license card and the SIM are aligned. And then we're gonna look at highlights of each category, some of the highlights of the changes in each category in the ISP. The A license, well, first of all, if you want to look at a PDF of the new A license progression card, there's a QR code for that. You can also find it by going to uspa.org/mya. Even if you already have an A license, you can go there and look at the online version of the card. And if you are a coach or an instructor who wants to verify someone's, one of your students' accomplishments in the category, then you can go to USPA.org verify and be able to, did I say that? Was that correct? Yes. So, and then you can be able to verify a student's and get things checked off on their online card. So you can use either one, and they both have been updated with the new SIM, so everything is already set up and aligned. And then the goal of redesigning the A-License progression card was to make it more complete and include sign-offs for a lot of things that were already in the ISP, but were probably often not trained in everyday, ground preps. And we also wanted to add all the canopy skills training, including the CEPs and a debrief section on the progression card so that those things would not be inadvertently forgotten by coaches and instructors. The new progression card, as I said, aligns exactly with the SIM academics at the beginning of each category, the free fall and the canopy skills. And this new progression card is going to be the required A-license card starting January 2026. So we encourage you to start using it as soon as possible, along with the SIM, to get used to that progression. And just as a reminder, this is a skill-based progression. We don't care what any drop zone calls any particular jump. It's a skill-based progression, even though we call them categories. What we want is for a student from category A through category H, when they're ready to get their license, that they have completed all of the skills on the A-license progression card, either the PDF version that can be submitted or the online card. Yes, Sonny?
Is it okay? I have a question.
Sure.
So, student shows up to a drop zone. I want to go through an AFF program. So, is a USPA profile created for them?
Great question. If they join USPA, then they will get, just like everybody else, they will have a profile created for them. And when they do that, then they can begin using the online card. Now, what we have done as we were testing the program last year at my drop zone is that we would use the paper card to get started and have that and use it sort of as a checklist. And then when they join, we could go in and with click, 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 we can catch up their online card and then continue to use that. So you can do a blended version.
So the instructor would do that for the student?
Correct, right,
Okay.
yeah, right, once they were a member. And also, when they do when they are a member, they can go on in every category and they can do the category quizzes, and they will automatically get checked off in their profile. So it's really nice.
Okay. So ideally, if a student half through the program moves, goes to another drop zone, can easily pull up via the credentials on the USPA website to verify what they've done so far.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Can I say something? Yes?
So you can actually, you have to be a member if you're the student view to see that page, but an instructor can really start the card. And the other thing is, you're verifying the requirement is different than marking the requirement. Remember that. So verification happens from knowing that it happened, logbooks, all that kind of thing. Whereas marking a requirement means I have verified that, I'm gonna mark it. And often what people have done in transition, like you're talking about, is yes, it's acceptable for you to see it in logbook on a paper form, and your drop zone maybe uses the online card and you're transitioning it, that's okay.
It'd be a good way they don't lose their card. Yeah. Awesome.
It's actually really handy for that, Sonic. When I first tried it out, when it very first came out, that was one of the huge benefits, is that like 2 weekends later I had a student who lost their card because we had started with paper, but we had just also started using the online and kind of trying it out, and most of his stuff was marked on mine, so it wasn't completely gone.
Cool.
All right, so we did a little reorganization of the ISP to align it with the A-license card. Each category is broken into these sections on the A-license card. Category at a glance and it matches matches in the ISP. And then you have exit and free fall, canopy, emergency procedure review, equipment, standard operating procedures, which before we had like aircraft and FAA rules, etc. The students had to learn. Those are all going to fall now under standard operating procedures, dive flows, and then category quizzes. That will be both in the ISP and on the card, what you will see for organization. And then here's an example of the new card. We made it nice and big for you. You can look at section D, and you can see the things on the side. And it kind of helps the instructor or the coach to plan for what they need to do. Canopy pre-jump, if you pull out the card ahead of time, like you should be, to know your student and where they're at, it reminds you of everything that you need to cover for that category before you actually jump. If you look on the next part, canopy debrief, obviously that's after. The academics up here, academics, let's be honest, often get forgotten. Hopefully, when we're labeling in that way and reminding people to go back to the book, they won't. And then the free fall debrief. So those two things align much more nicely now. And then here's another example of what the pages look like. I don't know how well you can see it from the back, but this is what the dive flows look like. You have up top up there what they need to do on each jump for free fall. Then you have their canopy drills at the bottom, the last two. And then what's really cool is that they can take the category quiz right there, and like Sherry said, that'll update right to their card. The advancement criteria matches the sign-offs. And that's what the pages of the dive flows look like at the end of every category. All right, we've got the highlight of changes. A is for arch, and 4 gear checks are now in there. Most of us are doing that anyway. It's reflecting industry best practice. That's another thing that we tried to do with the rewrite, is if there are really good things that are generally being done in the field, but they weren't in the sim, we wanted to make those standard practices. And that also reflects the BSR that says you will do one before you board. We clarified exit into 3 steps. We now have exit, launch, and flyaway. A lot of us use that language anyway. Raise your hand if you've used that language with your students. If you haven't, from my perspective, one of the really big advantages to that is that it's not just, you blew your exit, we need to fix it. It's which specific piece of the exit did you struggle with, and how can we fix it? It makes it more manageable. It also gives them a greater chance of success. If they really nailed that setup and things went poorly on the launch, I have something positive I can say to them about their exit. It gives me the language to debrief as well. We simplified equipment emergency procedures. No longer we're not gonna go in category A through, this is a closed end cell, this is all of the minor things. Obviously, we still had to discuss line twists being different. We had to discuss having an open container early or a pilot chute entanglement. But all of these smaller minor problems, we simplified it to, is your parachute there, square and steerable? Do you have a parachute you can land? If not, what can you do? Because most of those can be solved by the same thing, which is giving it a couple flares or canopy control check. And so we simplified it to make it easier. Where possible, we wanted to keep it simple. Category A especially has so much information and all of it is new that we really went out of our way to try to keep category A as simple as possible. It is what they need to know to make one jump safely. Because we know that in category B, we're going to give them more. And in category C, we are going to give them more. So we looked at what can we take out that they don't necessarily need to know, and what do we need to add that may have been missing for category A. And then we changed the landing priorities a little bit. Before it was flare for 3, and if you used 4, it was and prepared PLF. But that also wasn't necessarily a widely common part of the language. And we changed them to level wing, clear and open area, flare and PLF, because the student should never have to choose between the two of them. Those are equal in importance. And so we changed the landing priorities to reflect that. And there are your pictures. On the first picture over there on the far right, that's the exit. There's a picture of what the launch looks like when you step off, and there's a picture of the flyaway. And then this graphic is one I've gotten a ton of feedback about. It's one of my favorites. It's a really great graphic of what a PLF should look like.
All right, so category B. In category B in the IRM and the ISP, this is where the academic section is introduced, and it lists all of the same things that are on the A license card. The nice thing about it is Mel said that it's broken into sections, right? Free fall, exit and free fall, and then canopy and emergency procedure review. And I believe that on the old card, people were signing those off thinking emergency procedure review was just, okay, let's show me how you pull your handles. But if you opened up the sim, there was something specific, a different emergency procedure review in each category. But unless you opened the book, you didn't know what that was. And you know how it is. We're busy when we're out there running, doing jumps. So instead of just leaving the category names on the card, you're gonna see that in the academic section where all of those categories are on the card, now it says exactly what you're supposed to do for canopy and exactly what you're supposed to do for the emergency procedure, hopefully making it easy for all of you to do your job without having to open the book every time. And remember what in category D is the emergency procedure review. What am I supposed to be reviewing? So that we have repetition over times to help our students remember the important things. In category B, we've added a discussion of flight cycle, and that we related that to a student flare. We know the most common thing a student does is flare high on their first jump, and then want to let those toggles back up, which can create that flight cycle. So we started a discussion about that and why it's important when you flare to remember that flaring is a one-way street. Once you start it, you can stop as many times as you want, but you always need to hold if you're too high and then finish the flare and relate that to flight cycle and why it's important. And added a nice graphic for flight cycle. And then there's another example of a call out for SMTA to start introducing the student in category B to the structure at the drop zone for instructors, SMTAs, BZOs.
And the reason we included this picture up here isn't because the SMTA one is more important than any other one. We wanted to give you an example of when we said we called out vocabulary and defined it, what those call outs look like. And you'll find those throughout the ISP. There are a few in the other sections, but not as many. But we wanted to make sure that we showed you this is what we're talking about when we talk about a call out. They all look the same. Category C for control. We expanded extensively on the explanation of turbulence related to the flight cycle. We added an explanation of, a brief explanation of wake turbulence and some weather-related turbulence. I had a D license skydiver a couple of years ago who came in after a canopy and had a terrible landing, and he was right behind someone else, and I said, well, were you not thinking about wake turbulence? And he said, what's that? And he had a D license and an instructor rating I might add. And so we decided that if we're going to talk about turbulence in category C, we needed to be a little bit more specific and acknowledge the fact that different drop zones have different hazards, so we needed to cover a wider range of things that cause turbulence. We added a flight cycle drill. In category B, we talked about it. Now there's a drill for it. We are beginning to transfer the responsibility for knowing ground winds and winds aloft. We're talking about why that's important. And we also talked about how to improve their landing pattern and went more in depth into landing pattern. And here's a place that you're gonna notice some new graphics and some new information. This is the new graphic for turbulence. There's also a new graphic for the improving your landing pattern. So here we have the mechanical of the buildings, which we've always had. But we also, the old drawing is still there, updated, but still there. There's the mountains. How many of you jump where that's relevant? I certainly do. Wake turbulence, turbulence off a plane, and a little bit better definition of that. Here's the improving your landings graphic. Talks about low wind and high wind. The people that did the graphics, that wasn't us. They did a really, really fantastic job. And then we've got direction for D.
All right, so category D, direction. This is the first category where a canopy flight emergency procedure is introduced. And there are call outs for canopy flight emergency and canopy flight emergency procedures. And rear risers are the first of the CEPs. We have an improved explanation of spotting, including exit point, wind drift, and opening point. And it's a nice, simple explanation just to get a nice introduction for your student. And the rear float exit is also introduced. Show you some graphics for that. Have the rear float, or just a floater exit, sorry. A floater exit is introduced for category D, because sometimes we are transitioning students outside the plane. And then there's the call out for start, go, stop, canopy flight emergencies, and canopy flight emergency procedures. And always the reminder that we're trying to get out there, stay alive, practice 5.
E is explore. We're starting to explore different axes of flight. We talked more about flare techniques than has been in the ISP before. And we discussed the difference between a continuous flare and a staged flare. We've encouraged students before to find the sweet spot, but we didn't give them a whole lot of technique in the ISP. That was really left to instructors just to discuss with them. And we wanted to make that a little more robust. We felt like that was an area that really needed expanded upon. We also expanded on toggle stall information, how to find the stall point, and it's a really cool little piece of information. I learned something doing this about finding the sweet spot by looking up at your brake lines and watching as the loop goes through the ring. And then prior versions of the sim talked about an RSL, but actually I don't think anywhere in the sim, definitely not in the student section, there was no explanation of a MARD. And so we expanded upon what a MARD is and gave students a pretty detailed explanation of what a MARD is and how it works. I know that there were several people that gave talks about knowing your equipment better, and this is our attempt to help students know their equipment better. And it's kind of in a later category because it's a little more advanced. And here we have an advanced, expanded spotting lesson. I know that commonly on drop zones would it ask you to calculate the opening point and wind drift. Even instructors weren't always comfortable with that, and that was one that often just got signed off. And the discussion that we had on that one was really long, and it came up with an example, and it's as simplified as you're ever going to get it, and a really good explanation. And that's definitely an area where if you have instructors, or you are an instructor who's not comfortable teaching that section, and you were guilty of the sign-off, here is guidance that will help you to do that and do that well. And then, how many of you have used space before for spotting? A few of you? We gave an acronym to help students remember how to spot. This one is also courtesy of Jen Sharp. Skydivers, planes, airport, clouds, and exit light. It gives them 5 specific things to look for and helps them remember what they're doing when they spot. There's that really nice graphic for that. And hopefully as that language becomes more standard, I could have a student at my drop zone in Colorado but is maybe learning to spot on category E, and then ends up with Sonic over there in category G, and he can say what is spotting, and he'll know when they are able to rattle it off that they've got a good understanding. And then down here, I don't expect that you can actually read that from back there, but this is part of that description I was talking about, that chart with that lesson on opening point finger.
Category F, flat track. We named it flat track because of F, obviously, but also because tracks are supposed to be flat, right? Not diving.
The CEPs are back in category F, 90-degree break turns and half break flares. The break turns have always been in category D, but we took out 180s and 360s because if you are using a break turn on landing to avoid an obstacle, how big of a break turn do you really need to do? Probably not more than a 90. So let's practice what we're going to need in the event of an emergency and build good muscle memory and get good at those. And then if you're using a break turn for landing, more than likely you're going to need to flare from half breaks. So let's teach those two things and then blend them together for more practice so that they're actually prepared to use that skill if they need to. We also have changed the break landing. And this was another one of those things that many drop zones just never would want their student to come in and actually land in breaks. Students are just learning to get the flare, and now we were going to ask them to come in and do a braked landing on category F. I just don't think it was happening out there in the field, so as a safety item and to match what was really happening in the field, we changed this to braked landing pattern. So students do a braked pattern to learn about saving altitude in the pattern and being able to use brakes for that purpose, but go back to full flight for a final approach. This category introduces exit separation, has a much bigger explanation of exit separation and exit order, and clarifies that students can do the clear and pull jumps anytime during the progression, and that's just up to drop zone policy or instructor discretion, depending on the student, how the student is doing in the program and how strong their exits are. And there is the new graphic for exit order. We spent a lot of time on this and talked to a lot of the different disciplines to make sure that we did our best to get it right. I think it came out very nice.
We also did caveat that one, that your exit order at your drop zone may be slightly different based on specific circumstances. We know that exit order won't necessarily work for every drop zone, but it gives a good starting point and helps them to understand that exit order is important. Category G is routes. The explanation of exit positions, much more solid. We now have start, post, stop included in free fall drills. We all used it. It wasn't in the sim. Now it's in the sim. And adjusting glide path and projected landing point to help them improve accuracy. And our CEP for this one is turn reversals. That one's not new. But the idea that it's a CEP is. And here you have a graphic of the lower exits. You've got the rear float, the front float, and then the diving exit. So they can kind of get an idea. This does not replace instruction, but it does allow students to read this on their own and have some prior knowledge when they come see their instructor. We know that that increases retention of information. And then Brian's graphic here of projected learning. Uses the accuracy trick.
H, we have always had the stair-step approach. I believe it was in the SIM, wasn't it? Or was that just in the IRM? Yeah, in the IRM. So anyway, we've added the stair-step approach to the SIM. And the canopy skill that we added is low-turn recovery, and that is a canopy flight emergency procedure. And I wanted to mention that in the IRM, when this comes out, at the end of the ISP, there's going to be bonus free fall and canopy drills that will be listed in the IRM that are not in the SIM for students that want to do additional jumps. They want to continue getting coaching to get up to those 25 jumps. And there are many students that like to do that. So the way the ISP is set up, there are always extra jumps at the end that do not require a coach, but we will be providing in the future additional free fall and canopy drills for that program or that student that wants to do more. And here is the graphic for the stair-step approach. Still using start, coast, and stop, and introducing the final approach zone.
All right, so any questions about the ISP
Or comments
or
from
comments?
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, that for first jump courses, we've always taught equipment EPs in their entirety. Is the intent here for students as they progress through progression to slowly be introduced to the CEPs, or would you prefer they be introduced to all the CEPs during the first jump course?
So are you talking about canopy malfunctions?
Specifically Stay Alive or Practice 5.
So in the first jump course, we are not talking about CEPs, we're just keeping it very simple with controllability check and flying the pattern and a proper flare for a soft, finished flare. But not all of the CEPs, those would be added in the categories as they progressed.
Ron, you had something you wanted to say?
And just a cautionary note for instructors and coaches. We talked a lot about how we defined terminology for the student because they're not used to the lingo of skydiving. There are some terminologies that are new that you guys need to get used to, so I would go through and read everything. One prime example is when we talk about the low turn recovery. Who here knows the difference between stopping a turn and neutralizing a turn? So we got a few hands up. This came up in conversation with the Canopy Task Force when we were talking about low turn recovery. The difference is when you stop a turn, you come out of a turn, you raise your hands, and you go back to full flight. But in an emergency situation, you need to recover as quickly as possible. So neutralizing a turn is, if I made a left turn, brought my left arm down to my shoulder, to neutralize that turn, I bring the right toggle down, and that recovers me as quickly as possible. So there is some terminology that's completely new that has come out of some pretty in-depth conversations. So I just wanted to point that out. Yeah.
Okay, this has got to do with the concept of the ISP. In the past, we used to try to teach skydiving in a day. And we used to load our first jump courses up with all the information we thought was important and think that those people could actually remember and retain that information. Well, that's totally unrealistic. So either you're going to do a course over days, like the military does, which does work, but most of us don't. We're doing a course maybe in 4 hours, 6 hours, hopefully not 8 hours. So the ISP concept is to realize to spread that information out. This is to clarify your question. That we do what's very essential for the first jump course, for that first jump. And then we add on a little bit on every other category or jump that they do through the entire E-license program and build on that. Or what Jen likes to call their spiral curriculum, which is an interesting term. And so we realized that what we're doing is reinforcing the skills. We start with a very simple skill and then come around and build on it. And we continue to build on it until we get the A license. And hopefully what we're going to get is a much better certified A licensed skydiver that's going to be out there, that's going to be able to have skills, have fun, and be very safe.
Other questions?
Speak up.
Category A, free fall debrief. Initiate pull within 1,000 feet. Category B, assist pull within 500 feet. What is the difference between initiate and assist?
Look in the glossary. They're both defined. Omar, I'm going to teach you how to find the answer. Look in the glossary. Yep.
Any others? Slide?
Have you guys thought about maybe recommending some apps specifically for spotting? The space seemed to be a good little thing that you created there. And not to promote specific apps, but I'm sure you've all heard of Spot Assist. I don't know of any other app that I use more and show more to students than Spot Assist. Are you guys familiar with Spot Assist? Is everybody else familiar with Spot Assist?
Check out Fun Jumper, John.
Okay.
Check out It's Way Better.
Okay. So, yeah, I don't know if.
His question was, his comment was, have we ever thought about promoting an app such as Spot Assist to help people in these kinds of situations? So USPA is in a unique situation where we really can't do that, because then what is another, somebody else just hollered out about another app. So that's not necessarily one of our policies, but we definitely promote, for instructors to go search those out. So unfortunately, that's kind of like, we can't really do that. No.
I also think, I do sometimes tell people about Spot Assist or Fun Jumper, but I think that that's kind of like the last thing I do, because I want to make them do it manually first so they understand it. I think a lot of times our Fun Jumper base in general uses Spot Assist or Fun Jumper or whatever app to calculate the spot and has no idea how it works.
Fair. Noah did not need a mic. Any other questions? Bobby?
Yeah, the new sim book, is that for 25, 26, and is that out in print now?
It is, and it's available at the USPA store. If you want to buy a hard copy.
It's only good for 2025, not 2025, 2026.
Oh, yes.
We used to have a publishing house, and there were so many rules that we had to go by to get things done through them. Now that we're using Amazon and it's all print on demand, we can use color, we can change every year, so it's the most updated sim. The board's only supposed to change the manual once a year. So when we had the 2-year cycle, on the second year, instructors would have to, if they wanted to stay with the most updated equipment or information, go to the USPA website and get the change order, and then mark all the changes in the sim. Now, we can change it every year. So the version that's out, if it's the current version, it's the most current version, most current information. Sorry.
No, that's great.
But so you can get it, you can purchase a hard copy at USPA's store or on Amazon, and you can also download it or see all the different versions that are on the USPA website.
And that's not to say that you can't use an older version, because we will still produce the change orders. So if you want to still buy every other year, you can get the change orders and mark the changes in your year-old sim.
Robert?
When will USPA deem the next version to be effective? Because I run into cases where a plaintiff's lawyer is citing the sim. And if you have a new sim coming out for 2026 and the accident happens on January 2nd, does that revert back to the 2025 version, or does a new version apply that most people probably wouldn't have yet?
Typically that's approved at the summer meeting, and then there's an effective date for January 1. So when the new sim comes out, the new IRM. But if you have problems, bring it to the board and we can discuss if there needs to be a change or something. We'd have to talk about it.
Dave?
Are the ebook, online, flip book, iPhone app, and Android app, well, that's the point soon. Except for the Android app, are all of those synchronized with the current version?
So the ebook, yes. Flipbook, yes. PDF, yes. iPhone app, yes. With some people have been reporting a little menu problem that I'm looking into. Android, no. And I'm really sorry. I'm really trying. There's a process, a new process we have to do with Google Play, and we're still not through that process. So the Android one is delayed. I apologize for that.
What else?
In the iPhone app Sim or whatever, when they go to take their quiz there through the Sim app, can they, and does it sign off on their progression code?
Okay, so that's a good question about the quiz. If people are wanting to get credit for their quiz and on the actual online A card, they should be logged in, because I won't be able to tell if they're, because there's actually two different versions, because I wanted the quiz to be open for anybody. The one version that's not logged in is just JavaScript right there on the screen, so the instructor's really gonna need to be there to, share the information and mark it and all that. But if they're logged in, then they can get credit for it if they get 100%. The QR code goes to a really fancy interim thing that checks if they're logged in or not. If they're not logged in, it says, hey, you have a member, kind of tries to prompt them. But if you're trying to do that online, I would say, hey, make sure you're logged in to get credit, because people don't read,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, for the examiners, for the courses scheduled for 2025, it says they can have the publications in the past few years, but since this is a major change, are we requiring publications effective 2025?
I believe that's up to the examiner to make that decision. I would highly recommend it because it's so nice to use. Dave Lepke and I just taught a coach course and an AFF course before we came here using the new sim, and it was so user friendly. So I would highly recommend it, but it's not required.
Yeah.
Along those same lines, what's the
Sure.
along those same lines, what's the phase out for the old cars? Like, is there a percentage line in the sand where you can't use the old type of cars?
Yes, so the old cards will no longer be accepted by USPA as of January 1, 2026. So I would say implement the new ones as soon as possible at the beginning of this season and just start the process.
Ron had something else.
Sherry, just to go back to the OCM question. The examiners have to be using the most current version. All the manuals are downloadable on PDF. There's no reason that.
I'm sorry, I thought that was candidates. You were-
That's what I was referring to. I know I have to use.
Yeah, candidates too.
So that's what I was wondering, because it said that it has to be used.
Candidates too, because they can have an electronic version and they're absolutely free. There's no reason why they should not have the most current version.
And Ron has spoken.
Yeah.
Has there been any change or thought to change the military transition requirements?
That's a wrong question.
So we did update the things that needed to match, but there's some Kennedy things. But other than that, we left most of it intact because what is happening before you get to that point is all the same. So we just updated it mostly for Candy, so. And it's already updated online.
So
Okay, and we're gonna update the PDF.
So we have about a half hour of time left, so we want to go ahead and give you a little information on chapters 4 and 5, and just a brief sneak peek of the IRM and the EEM. So we're gonna keep moving now, is that good? So I'm just gonna start chapter 4 by saying this is recommendations for everyone. So who is everyone?
Everyone.
Right, and how many jumps could somebody have as part of that?
None.
Zero.
None.
26 as a new A license holder or less, right? It could be a student looking into this chapter, all the way up to God knows how many. So we wrote this to cover everyone. So some of the recommendations may not be exactly what you would do as the 20,000 jump person, but we had to write these for the lowest common denominator. So keep that in mind as you read through the chapter.
We're not going to go through and spend as much time in chapter 4 as we did in the ISP. The changes there are not as significant, other than the way that it's written, but we do have a few things. We have a QR code for the downsizing best practices card. If you wanted that QR code, Sherry promised it earlier, it's right there. And I'll give you a second to go ahead and do that. Thumbs up. We did update a handful of things. Obviously, we updated some of the terminology, just like we did in the ISP. Our hope is that the culture will change and we'll all be using the same terminology again. We changed out a few other things. For 2 out, we recommend that you land both parachutes unless you have downplane. We changed the canopy flight emergency procedures are added. We discussed canopies during an emergency. We expanded the section on currency training in particular. There's a lot of expanded information, but currency and doing a recurrency jump is quite expanded. We made clear guidance on what you should do when doing that currency information. Before it was, here's the things you should cover, but it didn't necessarily tell you what you should do. Now we have both of those. We have, a discussion of a MARD and an RSL. We learned in our discussions with each other that not everybody understands how an RSL and MARD works, particularly the MARD. And so in chapter 4 now, you can find a discussion of how a MARD works. Improved discussion of AADs and altimeters and the errors that they may have. We really wanted to focus on a culture of safety. And so in chapter 4, we started discussing the culture of safety and the responsibility everyone has for creating that culture. We recommend mutual gear checks for all skydivers of all experience. And we have a more robust weather discussion. And coming from Colorado, my favorite part is that it now includes density altitude, because that matters a lot in my world. We also added space here, hoping to continue that as part of the cultural shift. Better explanation of jump run separation, flight plan considerations for different disciplines, and we have a division on incident reports, which I'd like to remind you anyone can fill out, whether it's a fatality. The more information we have, the better information we can do when we do things like this. Several times this committee said, what's the data say? And our data is limited if we don't have incident reports. My other favorite change to chapter 4 is that we changed the decision altitude recommendations. It has been 1,800 for higher licensed jumpers for a long time. We bumped that up to 2,000. Canopies aren't the same as they were 25 years ago, and a little more time never hurt anyone. It's also an easier round number to see. And for D license holders, it's now at your discretion based on your experience and your equipment. We found most D license holders bump theirs back up to student altitudes in. Any questions about chapter 4? Sure. Talk about chapter 5.
All right, and chapter 5 is the discipline-specific recommendations. We had a lot of input from, like, almost every section was sent out to a subject matter expert in that discipline, that it was either at least reviewed for content and relevance, and then, or completely rewritten. The section 5-3 is night jumps, and we have a committee that's currently working on suggested future updates, so you'll see changes probably in 2026 for that. Canopy formations are much more robust. And that section, that entire section was reviewed by Jim Cowan, who's obviously an expert in that field. We moved from we moved logging and free fall time from chapter 5 to chapter 3. We combined the canopy sections, the two sections that we used to have for canopy and the B license course recommendations, into one section and just completely reorganized that. The high altitude section, which is now chapter 5-6, was completely rewritten by the, wrong order here. Completely rewritten by the High Altitude Task Force in conjunction with PIA. And the important thing to know about this section is that USPA is not providing recommendations for skydiving above 18,000 feet MSL, since that's outside of sport parachuting altitudes, and just gives the recommendation of where that you should go get additional training and information if you're working on jumps higher than that altitude. We reframed the wingsuit section to match other sections, because in the old sim, it was just about a wingsuit first jump course. And so now it is important for every wingsuiter to go in and read this, because it has all of the relevant information that all of the other categories have for this discipline. Let's see. And then camera flying is a much more robust section regarding mounts and emergencies. And I want to remind everybody that you should share this information, especially with younger jumpers who are thinking about putting a camera on their head, that USPA offers an online course for camera flying at the USPA library on the website. And if you haven't watched that yourself as a coach or an instructor or an examiner, you should get on there and do that, because there's a lot of good tips and basic teaching about it.
Guys, for the camera modules, they are $4.99. If you have an instructor rating, email me. I'm happy to give it to you for free, so that you know what tools are available for your students.
Okay, chapter 6 is the prorating section, and it's been rewritten to be a narrative form. And there were some questions before, this is that passive voice thing that Jen talked about, that led to some discrepancies. In particular, there were a lot of places in the sim that were like this. In particular, in the pro section, you'd find people arguing about, does it mean this or does it mean this? And it was very ambiguous. And so we clarified the initial rating requirements and the rating renewal requirements, and by putting it in that active voice and narrative language, hopefully that will eliminate some of the debate about what the intention was. And then in the glossary, we removed updated terms. One of the terms we removed is a May West. I don't think anyone's called spinning canopy in May West in over 20 years, just to give you an example of one of the terms that we removed. And then we added a few that have become part of our vernacular. And so that was the major change to chapter 6. And then we're going to talk briefly about,
What is the rules in USPA for organizing in-hops?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, what is the rules for organizing in-house when you're landing outside of your drop-off?
I'm gonna turn that one over to Ron. Oh, for like a demo?
No.
It's really
In-house are
big in Europe
in
now with
different
these
countries now, where they used to do it in Washington State. Yeah, the in-house. They're done in different countries. Norway does it every season. I know some in South Africa. The only time I've ever seen in-house in the United States was up in Washington State. Dave Rucker used to run in-house between the different islands outside of Seattle. But other than that, I don't know if there is any activity here where we're really doing that. Once in a while, I saw in Florida where people would maybe take a day and do a round robin of the drop zones. So I don't believe we have any recommendations on those type of activities, but you are jumping usually into another area or drop zone here, except for what Rucker did with different airports in Seattle. Matt runs.
I'm not in so, you guys said you can't leave an airport only 25 miles, right? So, you could have a situation where you have a student landing area from one airport to a different landing area, and jumping to a different, you still have to use the for the landing area student involved. There is no recommendation for sport jumpers going from one point to a different landing area, as long as you meet the qualifications for the square feet for landing. So, like out testing, those rules kind of go out for sport. So that's how we do that. Jumpers out. In countries a little bit, you can't travel at 25 miles.
I'm asking because we have quite a lot of USPA members coming to Scandinavia for these in-hub procedures. So that's why I want what is the USPA.
I guess that goes to local requirements. So airport landings is not a thing really here, right?
Okay, so let's move on to the IRM. So the IRM, a little history, very brief history about this and how it was developed.
In 2000, Kevin Gibson was still the Director of Communications at USPA, and he was joined by Jim Crouch in his first year as Director of Safety and Training. And Kevin and others had been working hard to put together the IRM because there was a new coach rating, and the new rating structure was being implemented. And we were changing from having jump masters in each training method to having a coach followed by instructor ratings in each method. The first coach course was in September of 2000, and that syllabus was the first part of the IRM. Kevin worked quickly with others to get the rating courses outlined and added content to the new IRM. All the rating course information was organized, and the first full edition was put out in 2001.
So we replaced the jump master during that transition, and we had to define clearly what the rating course criteria were, and that's what that created the instructional rating manual and created the new rating hierarchy. And at the time, we didn't have examiners in there yet. We had course directors, and we were still just at the beginnings of developing that highest level for our rating hierarchy.
And we certainly couldn't have, we needed to start somewhere, and it was a really great place to start. But we decided to make a major shift. Most people, when they open up the IRM, they open up the IRM because they're taking a rating course or they're teaching one. How many of you rating holders, regularly have opened the IRM since you got your rating? Regularly. There's a handful. But typically it's a book that you get your rating, you put it up unless you're an examiner, and it doesn't get looked at a lot. We wanted to change that. We want the IRM not to be considered to be just for course candidates and examiners, but to be an ongoing piece of education for all rating holders. And so we have in their teaching information, we have the teacher's guide for the ISP, but also there will be more information in there that an examiner can likely cover during a course, with the idea that experienced rating holders will continue to go back to it and use it as a resource because it's going to have an in-depth additional information where you can go to, you have a problem you haven't had before, go look in the IRM, there might be an answer. You're struggling to teach a concept that you feel like there's a better way to do that, there's going to be some additional information in the IRM. We really want it to be practical, useful, and not just something that people pick up during a course. It's for all instructional rating holders. And we also, just like within the SIP, have an increased focus on Canopy skills. And this is the reorganization piece. The teaching guide is going to be chapter 1. Chapter 2 is going to be how stuff works. A referent model, reference means to refer, and so we're going to give you a model to refer to and talk about skill analysis. 3 is going to be general procedures for instruction and supervision, and that applies to all disciplines, all methods. 5 is going to be teaching strategies and philosophies. 6 is going to be skydiving culture. 7 is ratings and privileges. 8, new renewals. And 9 is going to be earning an instructional rating, and that will really be the how-to for running a course, or for taking a course, what you need to do, and how you need to earn your rating. When you look at the AFF specific, the coach specific, the tandem instrument specific, IED specific, those are going to be embedded now within these sections, because all of these sections are important regardless of what rating you're earning. We also found that the coach section is probably going to be pretty thick, because there's so much there that applies to all of the disciplines. We're just kind of doing this very quickly because there's not a lot to show you yet. We know what the structure is going to look like, but we don't necessarily have all the content done. And then I'm going to let Sherry speak to the EEM because she's worked on that one.
So I believe this was the brainchild of Jen and Ron, yeah, the EEM. So in an effort to further define the audiences, so we have the SIM that the ISP is talking to the student and the licensed jumper. And then we have the IRM, that is, the audience is every instructional rating holder, and we hope they use it as a guide for having more tools in their tool bag and how to teach all of the information that they are going to learn at a course and need to use for different students. The EEM is aimed at exactly what it says, examiners and evaluators. Now the EEM is not just it's not just the examiner rating course outline. It is expanded information, more in-depth information for examiners and evaluators at a much higher level. It's going to discuss the role as a facilitator, running a course, role as a mentor, because that's what we need to be to set the highest standard. And then role as an examiner, how do we do our job? And then finally in chapter 5, there is going to be all the outline, the information for an examiner, the examiner rating course. And Rob has worked hard putting together even a workbook for examiner candidates that they'll be able to use during that course to help the whole thing sink in and be able to go out in the field and really be a good examiner. Jen or Rob, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
The appendix, we have
Pardon?
the appendix, but for examiners to, the appendix is not up there, which is something that came up with Rob, mentioning that we don't necessarily have a self-checklist of, hey, did I run a good course, or if I'm going to be what constitutes passing for, hey, you ran a good course. So that, I think, is a really significant thing that I hope a lot of people want to use.
So, we wanted to take the idea of this product that will improve our skydiving community's lives and put in all the hard work to make sure that it works really well for everybody and that it's really useful. We want these to stop being books that stay in people's lockers and become books that are actually useful and used. And the best way that we're going to do that is if you give us feedback. There were 9 of us. We consulted with a whole lot of other people, but there's no way in a community this size that 9 of us thought of everything. So please let us know what you love about it. We do want to hear all the things that you love, but if there's something that you're like, this could use improvement, we would like to know that too. Because these are living documents that are going to be updated annually. And then the last statement, Sherry and I thought it was really important to give credit where credit is due. When we had our first meeting, Jen Sharp had taken the time to kind of write everything out in narrative form already and was really humble in saying, hey, I'm not married to any of this, I just wanted to give us a starting point. And if we hadn't had that starting point, we couldn't have done this in 11 months. We are all volunteers, we all have other jobs, and finding time to meet was sometimes tough. And we spent a ton of time, and without the work that Jen had put in ahead of time, this project wouldn't have come about for another 2, maybe 3 years. So we really wanted to give her that credit. That's all we have. If there are any questions or comments.
Yeah, I got a question in regards to emergency procedures. What does the manual say as far as technique or method, or do they still open it up to drop zones to teach their methods?
So USPA has shied away from being very specific on certain things, like how to execute your emergency procedures. We give scenarios when you need to perform your emergency procedures, but because there's differences, and there's pluses and minuses for the differences that are taught across different drop zones, we left it very open in areas where there's a lot of contentions, where it's contentious.
Sorry, I know that some people have to leave, so before anybody else leaves, if you need a rating renewal seminar signed off, this counts.
Yep.
So make sure that you let one of us know you're here so we can sign it off.
Us too are here. I'll be at the door.
Any other questions?
She'll be QR code.
Yeah.
We'll see how they do.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer.
If you're like mile high or if you're at 6,000 elevation, you use actually proper gear to go up from 13.5 or something like that, and AGL.
I jump at 6,000 feet, and I would want to see how someone else uses different gear to go up higher, because a lot changes at that altitude. I'm not super excited personally, being from that altitude.
You guys only go 11.5?
What?
You only go 11.5?
At Mile High, they're going to 12.5, but we're right underneath that 18 shelf. I jumped down in Canyon City, and that's even higher yet. And yeah, we're staying under that shelf. I'm not super excited to take a student above that.
I understand that. I'm just asking questions.
Sure.
I did see a number of USPA instructors, and that's what I asked. I just saw one at 24,000 feet. It was a lot. I'm not saying I'd even be comfortable with that, but I'm just starting to see that kind of process starting to happen. Now, they had great success because they have a long time to work with the students.
You know, Matt, I work in some high altitude drop zones outside Mexico City and stuff, and we're running up to 18,000 feet with no wingboard oxygen, which I don't particularly like, but I tolerate and deal with it. My point about taking students above a certain altitude, above 13 or 14, even if my SF instructor courses, I really, when I have the altitude available, I will not do it. I've been offered to go to 18,000 feet a number of times here in Florida, and I will not do it. This is the reason I won't do it. they need to perform, they're performing under stress. When you're under stress, you're using up more oxygen. And when we take them up higher, you have to realize that we're putting them under more stress yet, and it's unfair conditions to perform. And with that, you're gonna have increased accidents. Because when the stress level goes up, the decision-making goes down. And if you're allowing it, you gotta realize that you are responsible for actually being part of that. And so that's where I say, when under stress situations, training situations, I just say no. You know, that's for later. You know, and
There's official thoughts, yeah.
I was just gonna ask, you guys talked about adding conversations about safety culture within the state organizations. Awesome. Can you just expand a little bit about like what areas of the safety culture we were talking about?
well, all of it.
All of it is very broad, so.
Well, I'm not really been really active on this, but I do know that it's come out with some harassment issues, so how we treat each other. So it's not just education; it's also you know, just being making it safe at drop zones during jumping hours and after jumping hours. That people feel comfortable so that we're actually retaining our jumpers, not doing things that might drive them away. And I really believe that it's, when I say all of it, I'm really talking about, you know, the human rights part of it as well, as much as safety, as in regular pin checks and briefings and regular routines and, you know, just process. But bigger than that.
I appreciate that, because often when we see it in the manuals, it's not about the code of ethics stuff, it's about safety culture on skydiving. So I love that is actually in the program.
I'd like to see it reinforced on the code of ethics as well.
Must be.
I know in Canada, all coaches are mandatory to do Coaching Association of Canada ethics course online to maintain your rating.
At the
It's
very
great.
beginning of the manuals, you're gonna find the value statement, and the beginning of the IRM, there'll be the instructor rating holder code of conduct. And we talked a lot about keeping that prominent and up front and center.
Can we get a copy of the slideshow to bring back to our own drop zones for our own ready renewals? Because there's just so much information to bring back to all the students.
Ron, can you do that?
Yeah, we can put that in the download section. I'll have that done early next week.
Yeah.
How do you guys deal with somebody who violates the code of conduct?
How do I feel personally?
No, how do you deal with them as an administration?
I'm actually not on the board or staff. I was one of the 9 that was selected. And so I'm gonna hand that question to a board member.
The code of conduct is enforceable now.
Okay.
So that could be a 1-6 section.
Refer to the compliance group then for review to see.
I just started recently hearing about camera briefing or camera course. Where is that on the USPA website?
In the USPA library.
USPA library?
Yeah.
And a good plug for the library, it's got a lot of good information in there.
I was wondering if there was consideration for 5-7, where you recommend, where it recommends 200 jumps, if they would consider adding or an instructional rating that has completed the camera flying course. Like our coaches, I'd like to be able to allow them to wear cameras, during if they're performing a coach jump. And I know there's controversy over coaches having a minimum of 100 jumps, but I think that there's individuals out there, military specifically, I mean, they fly APGs on their helmets in their course, so I would allow a person with their free fall that has 40 jumps, and some people that has 300 jumps don't need to be flying.
Okay, we're running out of time. I'm going to address that because that's a passion of mine. I fought for it in meetings for years and years. I really believe that our coaches jumping with that video at 100 jumps, 120 jumps, is we're trying to hide an arm behind her back. expecting that they're gonna be able to give good debriefs, because they're still trying to figure it out. So I lobbied that if, somebody got a coach rating at 100 jumps, and it was agreed to that if the examiner and the SND and the drop zone agreed, we're gonna allow the coach to wear the camera at 100 jumps, but with the coach rating. So we're trying to kind of loosen it up for the coaches, because for me, I really believe that it's necessary. But just in that particular circumstance.
And I just want to clarify that it is a recommendation, right? There's a reason the board has not made that a BSR, because we know there are circumstances where there are some people that have the skills and can get the proper training and can do it safely. So that's remained a drop zone decision and an instructor SNTA drop zone owner decision, and I believe that unless there's some major change, that's going to stay that way.
We are out of time.
We are out of time.
Questions, please
Thank
come up
you.
and ask any one of us.
And Brad Jen